So it's supposed to be a cool, like some kind of marking thing, but I have whiteboard markers and I realize that I can't draw about halfway through.
Don't say more. You just stick with that.
It's a smart bird. It's learning about how to teach a nature-based group. It has a snowy beak. I gave it a snowy beak. Ambient bird noises too. It's kind of nice. It's very relaxing. Right. If anybody is having trouble getting set up or connecting, but you can hear my voice, or you can see my mouth moving, but you can't hear my voice, call me so I can try and help you before it starts. And just want to make sure everybody has equal access to the content. Alright, so we are just a couple minutes until exactly 10 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. I'm Christine Kreitz. I will be hosting your class today, which is Teaching for Nature-Based Groups and Classes. I'm really excited to be doing this. This is my first live streamed class that I've done without a live interactive audience of more than one person. So bear with me as we kind of go through this new process and work out how this is going to be a tool for my teaching as we continue down this path together. So first off, thank you so much for being here. This is really exciting. I think it's going to be cool. I have a couple things I want to go over before we really get into the nitty-gritty. First off, this class is going to be a little bit shorter than originally planned because I was kind of anticipating there being people live in the class. That takes up a lot more time than just me sitting here and being able to talk to you. There you go. Write things for you. Kind of get all this figured out. It might end up being a little shorter than originally planned, so just FYI. Also, if anyone is still having connectivity issues, or if you can hear me but can't see me, or if you can see me but you can't hear me, call me, text Roger. Both of us are here, and we would be happy to help you out if you need some help. So, all right, so to get things kind of rolling here, those of you that don't know me personally, my name is Christine Kreitz. I'm a licensed professional educator here in the state of Oregon and in the state of Illinois. I have a master's in education for teaching, curriculum, and instruction development. And I really like using those skills in kind of an out-of-the-box way from a normal teacher. Rather than working within classrooms in, a very structured, four walls, box of kids kind of setting, I prefer to work individually with my students or work with people that have kind of unique interests and talents. Sometimes called exceptional and twice exceptional, and then also just non-traditional learners. It's really what I specialize in, so that's why I wanted to offer this class. I see so many people, like in my everyday life, in groups online. I'm part of a couple of different things that I'm really passionate about, as far as like clubs for people that like to forage, people that like to create things with their hands, people that like to go bird watching. And there are so many folks that take these amazing pictures and give us such great posts and all this cool stuff and go, man, I really want to do that. I want to learn how to do that. But there isn't a class for learning how to do this awesome thing that only this one person does. So what I want to do with this class is give you a couple of tools to be able to do that, to be able to teach that class that everyone is so interested in you teaching, and kind of bolster some confidence and like make you feel like you really are somebody that can go out there and make a difference with your knowledge, because you are. We all are. We just have to figure out how to reach that. So I guess the first thing that we'll talk about as far as pedagogy goes is, what's pedagogy? It sounds like a weird word. It's actually not. Pedagogy is the art of teaching. It's the methods by which we learn, looking at how people actually absorb and commit information into their brains, and the methods that someone can use to instruct that to happen. So when you're being a teacher, you're using pedagogy. So I'll write it up here. Might have to say bye-bye to some of our lovely drawings for room space, but I'll do this. I know you liked the bird. All right. So we'll do this. All right, so pedagogy is the art of teaching. So your learners are not teaching, they are learning, okay? So pedagogy kind of applies mostly to you as the instructor. Something that we have to talk about as far as how your learners are learning is called learning modalities. There's a bunch of different educational theory on what is actually happening when an individual is learning and committing information to their memory. I personally have found that learning modalities most accurately represents all of the kind of interesting and cool combinations of different styles of learning that we see across all kinds of different people, so that it's not just looking only at people that are very good at absorbing information through reading or through looking at manuals. We're also talking about people like kinesthetic learners that learn by moving. We're talking about people that learn musically, people that learn from within themselves. Those are called intrapersonal learners instead of interpersonal learners. There's a whole bunch of these. I'll write that up here too. Learning modalities. Alright, so we've got our learning modalities, which is how someone learns. So I'll just give you an example, and that's going to be myself, and I'll try and follow it up with somebody else that nobody really knows. Just to give you an example of how you can apply this in figuring out who your audience is when you're going to teach. When you're going to teach a group of people, figuring out who you are as an instructor and who your audience is are probably the two biggest, most fundamental steps to setting up a class. You need to know what you're able to teach, you need to know what you're confident in teaching, you need to know how you're going to teach it, and you need to know who your audience is. For this class, my audience was really broad. I was trying to attract as many different people as I possibly could to give them access to this information because I thought it would really be beneficial. So I cast my nets really, really wide. I ended up with a very interesting range of folks all over the country, and I'm really excited to be able to show this to you. And that means that I have to adjust my teaching to be as applicable to each one of you as possible, because right now you guys are learners and teachers. Okay, so my modalities of learning, when someone is teaching me, I learn best if I can hear it out loud, if I can hear it explained, and then be able to explain it back to you in my own way. So I take information in and then I try to interpret it and look for affirmation of that. I have a couple other ways that help me a lot too. I can be very musical. I can get song lyrics stuck in my head for an entire week, even if they're a very obscure song. Walking to a rhythm actually helps me when I'm having to commit things to memory or try to do any kind of like vocabulary or spelling recall. And then there are things that I don't learn well with at all. I am absolutely terrible at doing visual learning, especially when it has to do with math. If I can't go in there and explain and talk through it and kind of figure it out loud with somebody, there is no chance that that math problem is getting solved. However, somebody like Roger is totally the opposite. If I tried to explain to him orally how to do this thing, he might get it. But if I really, really want him to know how to do it for sure, I gotta text him. Because having it written down and being able to read it is gonna stick better in his memory. So thank you for being my example. So, and then there are other people that if they don't go through their morning routine of physically moving something to another place, they'll forget to take it with them. So they're kind of a kinesthetic learner. So it plays into your life in a bunch of different ways, and being able to assess what kinds of learners you have in your group and being able to teach to their strengths is going to be one of your most important puzzle pieces for setting up a class. Alright, so moving back over here. By the way, I do have to say that this is extremely weird to not be able to ask questions and be able to get you guys to kind of tell me what you need me to tell more about. It's really difficult to do something called a learning check when I can't answer and ask questions for you. So I guess that's something that we'll talk about for just a second. When you impart information into a room, you have to look for confirmation that your learners have, number one, heard you, okay? You have no idea how many times you've been in a class, and I'm sure this has happened to everyone, where you just couldn't hear the person talking. And if that's happening right now, I'm super sorry. But it's the worst thing ever because you're interested, you want to know what's going on. People around you are taking notes, they're engaged, and you're like, what? What? Can you like scream louder? And it's terrible. So make sure people can hear you. Number two, make sure people have the opportunity to go, whoa, I need to write this down. Please slow down and let me write, because that is awesome. You want people to write things down. The motion of going onto a piece of paper, taking a thought from here, okay, and actually putting it down in writing in a way that you personally understand is kind of an amazing cognitive feat, and it really helps people retain information. So make sure people can write stuff down. Make sure people feel comfortable asking questions. I am one of those teachers that'll go, all right, does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have any questions? Questions, questions, questions for an hour, because I am so focused on trying to figure out what you need to know. And if what you need to know is different than what I am originally saying, please tell me that, because otherwise I can't teach you. So there's a lot of interaction with teaching, and you got to kind of make sure that it goes both ways. It's a two-way street. Don't just stand up here and talk like this for hours. Nobody's going to listen to you. You have to be kind of, sort of, like this much interesting, okay, and have some kind of interaction, okay. I also tend to get nervous at the beginning of whatever I'm teaching. So, like, you'll probably notice once you teach your first class, you're going to be like, okay, I'm this person, and I'm teaching the class, and no one look at me. And then by the end, you'll be, like, totally making jokes with everybody, and having all kinds of, just fun back and forth that really make the class more dynamic just as you kind of fall into it and get more natural. So you're going to notice that happen with me. You'll notice it with yourself. It's not something you need to worry about, and it's not something to be embarrassed about. It happens to everybody. I think when you teach, you're so hyper aware of what you look like, how you're acting, and how you're being perceived by other people that sometimes you lose focus of your content. So at times like that, it's also really good to try and hone in on the specifics of what you're teaching and be passionate about your subject. So I'm going to write some of this down because I just gave you a whole bunch of stuff without writing, and I kind of meant to. It's okay to acknowledge mistakes as an instructor. Your students will thank you for it. So, give time to write, ask questions, listen, and give and get feedback. And I'm going to put this over here, somewhat for myself, but also for you guys, because I feel like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy got it right when they put "Don't Panic" in really big letters with a happy face on the back of the book. Because breathe and did I spell breathe right? Is there an E on the end? Okay, I wanted to check. See, gotta interact with your learners. Okay. So there's some fundamental tips, things that I live by. So I guess the next thing that we'll talk about is once you've kind of assessed your learners, given you some foundations for how to talk to people and how to engage, I want to give you some tips on what to do about really getting more than just verbal feedback. I know that sounds kind of weird. How can you get any other kind of feedback from a group of people outside when we're walking around? Well, there's a lot more to communication than just talking. Facial expressions and body language are huge, and they can be really instrumental for you to kind of gauge your group and see how people are responding to what you're saying, but it also gives you information on how to guide discussion and guide thinking, okay? And those are two really big things that teachers do. Besides just telling people information, we help guide people to their own answers. And there's a lot of different answers to a lot of different things. The right way to diagram and write down what kind of bird species you're observing might be very different for you than it would be for a person who's a different kind of learner. So it's kind of important to watch how people are responding. So I'll give you two examples. Say we're in a classroom and you've got, you're not even in a classroom, even if you're outside, it doesn't really matter where you're teaching. You've got somebody who's like this, just the whole time, like super stiff, really uncomfortable, doesn't want to touch furniture, isn't leaning against anything, doesn't have any relaxed posture, locked knees, head up, kind of squinty eyes, possibly downturned mouth, things like that. That person looks like they're really uncomfortable. So we don't know why, and you can't assume why. And that is a really, really big part of this. You can't just decide, oh, this person looks uncomfortable because it's hot out. It might not be that. It might be because they wore the wrong shoes. But they look uncomfortable, so that's what you need to address. Not, why do you look miserable? But how can I adapt what we're doing to make it better for you? I want you to have a great experience. I want you to learn this. I want you to be able to really engage with us. And it looks like that's not happening, so how can I help you? You want to just try to be as accommodating and as understanding as possible without assuming what your students are going through or what your students are trying to deal with as they're learning, because that's not your job. Your job is to help them learn. Your job is to guide them to get there on their own. So, all right, so let's go back up here. So when I was in grad school the second time, I wrote my graduate thesis on something called student-generated inquiry. So basically, student-generated inquiry is where instead of you going, all right, Sally, what's the capital of Russia? It's finding a way to get Sally to come to you and go, what's the capital of Russia? And me going, I don't know, but I would love to help you find out. That's what we're trying to get to. That's where we're trying to go with this. Instead of having just directly telling someone that information, they're not going to remember that. If somebody came up to you and said, oh, did you know that 12 times 12 is 144? You're not going to sit there and be like, oh, 144. Oh my God. But if you sit there and actually have someone go through the steps of math and be like, look how cool this is. When we stack things up this way, break it into these different blocks and make it interesting and interactive, and you get there by yourself, you suddenly made numbers do something. Now it's significant. Now it matters. Now it's interactive. Rather than me just saying, hey, don't touch that water, it's going to be really cold and probably smell kind of bad, letting you go over there and like get a good look at it and like make that judgment call on your own is going to be more significant to the learner, because it's going to be something that they remember for longer. It's something that they generated in their mind. It was their idea. They're the one that thought of it. Therefore, it sticks. Because whenever we have something that we think is our idea and it's awesome, we think about it way longer than anybody else's. Alright, so getting your students to kind of ask their own questions. How do we do this? It sounds great, Christine. It sounds amazing. It sounds like the best thing ever. It sounds really hard. Actually not. It's not that bad. So let's do an example. Roger, can I have you? Or do you want to stay out of the frame? There you go. Roger, ladies and gentlemen. Hi. Yay. Alright. So, right here, I have a bunch of tabs that are different colors. Okay. And unbeknownst to Roger, what I'm trying to get him to do is I want him to put them in spectrum order, as close as possible. So we're starting out with green, purple, kind of a white, blue, gray, and like an orangey yellow. Some of those aren't really in the spectrum, so I'm interested to see what he's going to do. But that's what the task is, without him knowing. Okay. So rather than telling him, okay, now let's start with the one that's earliest in the rainbow and put it first and then move all the other ones, I want to say, here are these. Can you organize them in a way that's meaningful and then explain why? It is harder. They're going to look at you like that. It is harder. You're not just giving them information. You're actually asking them to do something about it. All right, Roger has completed the task. How did you do it and how is it significant to you?
I did alphabetically.
Boom. Okay, different kind of learner, different thought process than what I had, but the task is still accomplished. We still put these in some semblance of an order that made sense. Good? All right, awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. So, let's get rid of this. How's everybody doing so far? All hanging in there? I'm going to go ahead and probably give you like a 2-minute break to like stretch, grab water, do those kinds of things. I don't want to make you sit in a chair where you feel like you're going to miss something if you get up. So this would be your time to like kind of take a break. We'll be back. Thanks. Hope your break was good. So, we left off talking about how to look at different modalities of learning and adapt our teaching to those individuals. Anything else that I should recap, just in case? We're pretty good so far. We've been on pretty similar stuff. All right, awesome. So the next part of what I want to talk about is going to be more logistical. Rather than kind of how you teach and how you learn, we're going to be looking more at things of like how to organize a class and how to be a teacher. The first thing you want to do if you decide that you want to hold a class is figure out where you're going to hold it. I mean, it seems like kind of a no-brainer, but when you get all excited about something and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to bring all these people, we're going to go, oh wait, where are we going to go? Where's everyone going to park? Are they open then? What's the hours? Do I have to pay ranger fees? Yeah, figure that all out in advance, because trying to do it after you have people signed up and all of a sudden you've got 10 people coming to a spot where they can't go is a big bummer for everybody, especially when you've got people that aren't necessarily as mobile as others, as far as handicaps and physical limitations go. So make sure that you're being really respectful of like your participants need to know like where you're going in advance and it needs to be checked out in advance. Let's see. The next thing that you need to work on is advertising. Find a really nice image, either something that you photographed yourself or something that is royalty-free or not under copyright protection online. Please don't steal people's stuff off the internet. I know, like, copy and paste off Google, it's super easy. Please don't do it. It's number one, it's illegal, and number two, I mean, if you're going to be a teacher and you want to really like help other people learn how to do stuff, let's help them learn to do it right. Okay, so make sure that you're just using your materials responsibly. If you're going to be putting out information on social media, kind of like I did a combination text and graphic to be more eye-catching, but also fit the space requirement for that media, for it to show up right on people's phones, laptops, tablets, etc. If you're going to be doing a different kind of campaign with it, where you want to actually print flyers or run an ad in the newspaper, there are so many guides online for how to do that and have it be really effective and how to get the most out of your money. I know Facebook advertising, like, it works okay. I've had medium success with it. Maybe I haven't been doing it correctly because I'm not an advertising guru and I don't claim to be. But trying your best and seeing what options work for you as far as advertising is definitely not a bad thing to try and do. You want to attract people to your class, make sure they know it's out there. Even if they can't attend it this time, if you do a recording or if you decide to hold a second session at a different location, you might end up with a second audience, and that would be really cool. Because then you've done a practice of the class the first time, and you'll be able to, kind of expand upon it and improve upon it the second time. So, location, advertising. The third thing that you want to think about is how long can you teach for? I originally set the time for this class to be 3 hours because I was going to try and do more of an in-person session where a bunch of people came in and we did kind of an interactive workshop. I was also going to provide lunch, which would have been super cool, but I didn't realize that this is the weekend in Portland where they like shut down 12 city blocks and everyone jumps in the river and like there's a whole ton of stuff going on. So it was kind of a logistical oops to try and hold it in person on this Saturday, which is why this turned into a live cast instead of having a bunch of people. So next time, it'll be different, but hey, live and learn. That's the entire point of this. So, you also want to make sure that you know what you are and aren't allowed to teach. So, I'm a licensed educator, so if we're looking at technical laws, I'm allowed to teach children grades K through 12 in a classroom setting. I'm also a licensed kids yoga teacher, and I have extensive experience with kids of pretty much all age groups. I've also taught at a university setting, and I've worked with a lot of adult learners through different volunteer organizations, so my background's pretty rounded as far as like who I can talk to. I would not say that I am an expert on infant and toddler care at all. I don't claim that, and I would never want to misrepresent myself as being an expert on that. At the same time, I would also be focused, what am I trying to say? basically don't sell yourself as something that you're not. Don't advertise yourself as being a person that's specialized in this kind of learners just because you think that's going to be your best audience, because there's a lot of regulating agencies and you don't want to get in trouble. Other thing, you should figure out if you need any kind of insurance or if you need people to sign a waiver before you have your class. This is something that's really important for anybody that's doing an outside activity, regardless of where it is. If somebody slips and falls, doesn't matter who, it doesn't matter how, it doesn't matter why. Oh my goodness, do not restart my computer. Sorry, everyone. If somebody falls, you need to make sure that they aren't going to sue you for a lot of money. So, make sure you have insurance or at least a waiver. If you don't have a waiver, there are so many available to download online, or I would be happy to send you a copy of the one I have that I've written for myself, and you can edit it for your purposes. That's fine with me. I don't want anybody getting sued. That's the whole point of this, is to do it safely and make sure that everyone can do things, it's all best practice. Best practice, we should write that. It's a big, so. All right. So best practices is kind of a term that I'm sure most of you have heard it used in different scenarios, but within teaching, it kind of talks about like making sure that you are making choices and using learning tools and organizing your classes in a way that is most beneficial to the most number of people. You're just doing it right. Things like having insurance, having a waiver, having boundaries and guidelines set up, having a lesson plan written out, all of those things would be considered best practices. I know a lot of teachers, especially me, several others that I know, we kind of like to move around and not hold on to a strict lesson plan and be like, bullet 1, subheading A, point 2. That's great if you like to do that because it's super organized. It helps people keep things in a really nice, organized, hierarchical list in their head, which is really, really important for certain kinds of learning. Even if you don't do that though, if you're more of one of these kind of sit in the room, test it out, talk however you feel like it, kind of like I am, you still want to have a lesson plan written. I wrote a lesson plan for this even though I'm not reading off of it. It's still there because I have to go through that process in my mind before I can just sit down and talk to people for an hour. I can't just babble, maybe that's what it sounds like I'm doing, but it's a process on your end. Before it becomes a process for your students, you have to go through and basically teach the class to yourself internally before you can make that come out. You have to have visualized it and run through every single word that you're going to say, everything you're going to think about, the points where you want to expand, the points you want to pause, what you want to write down. All of those different things make it so that the class comes together and looks organized to other people. I know that I can't see you, but raise your hand if you've had a class where the teacher came in and had no idea what they were doing and it was so disorganized that everyone was just yeah, me, hi, everyone has had that class, everyone. Roger had a professor fall asleep during one of his classes. True story, okay, yeah. It's not good. I mean, I know we all have bad days, but if you're trying to do a class and it's a Saturday only or a one-time thing, don't be that guy. It'll make it so you don't get a lot of return customers, and it also kind of gives people a bad taste for that style of learning for a while. We really just want to try and make it so that you come off as a competent professional and people respect you for it. So that's the next it's a really good segue into what I want to talk about next, which is how to command attention and get people to respect you when you're talking. Let's write this down because it's important. All right. Okay. Alright, so some of these things are going to apply more to certain age groups than others, obviously. If you're working with 5-year-olds, it's probably going to be pretty different than if you're taking a college group or if you're taking a class of retirees to the same waterfall. So I'm going to try and give you some general stuff that works really well kind of the first time through, and then I'll try and get into a little bit more of the specifics of a couple different age groups that I think are going to be the specific folks that I know are watching this class will find useful. So, the first thing when you want to grab attention and respect is to give attention and respect. I know, it's cheesy, it sounds like an inspirational poster, but it's so true. If you go into a room of people, or if you are going into a group and you inside view them as like, oh, it's this rowdy bunch of kids, they don't respect anything, they're only here because their moms dropped them off, I don't really want to do this. You know, if you go into it with that attitude, that's the exact same attitude they're going to give back you, like, oh, who's this lady? I don't want to be here, my mom just dropped me off. Just don't have it be that way, you know? You want to make sure that you distract away from that attitude as quickly as possible. An adult situation of that, basically, like, let's say that you were going to get everybody together and, like, you kind of showed up and just, for whatever reason, somebody showed up that doesn't look like the kind of person you'd normally take hiking. If you treat that person in a manner that's different than the rest of the people that you're hiking with, or if your attitude towards your group changes based on that person, that's going to make them feel singled out, and you're going to have a much harder time actually teaching and engaging with them and helping them to correct whatever threw you in the first place. So if they weren't wearing the right shoes and you were like, oh my god, Crocs? Are you serious? Who does that? What's wrong with, you can't do that. You can't go up to that guy and be like, you kind of have to be like, hey, I see that, you know, you might have some questions about gear. That's really interesting. I love talking to people about that kind of stuff. How, like, what do you want to know about it? That's how you handle that person. And so if you initially give that respect and give that attention to somebody that obviously needs it, that's the person you're going to get respect and attention back from. Happens the same way in a classroom. If you give attention and respect to the kids that act out, rather than either just trying to shut them down or yell at them or put them in a disciplinary situation, they will give you attention and respect back. That is an empirical fact, and you can quote me on it. It's the only way to deal with a situation where you've got 28 kids in the same room that all have an individualized education plan. You can do it. It's hard, but it takes a lot of energy out of you. I know a lot of people that do outdoor-based education and like kind of nature specialty, even artistic stuff. Some of us tend to sometimes be very introverted, and it takes a lot of energy in order to like people. I know. I actually feel sometimes like I'm a really introverted person that just, I have like this other like performance Christine that comes out and does like all of my teaching and all of my waitressing and my customer service and like working with kids. I'm like, oh, that's wonderful. I love dinosaurs. What is your third favorite dinosaur? Mine is definitely the Brachiosaurus. There's that person, and then there's the, please don't make me talk to people. Please don't make me talk to people. It's two different sides. Teaching is kind of a performance, and I know that it's really scary and like you don't want to have to do it, but like once you just kind of throw yourself out there, it doesn't really have to be you. It's kind of a different, it's like somebody playing you. It's like a persona that you create, a character that's able to act and be social and outgoing. Like there's normal me that doesn't really say a ton, you know, but when I am in a position where I'm in front of a lot of people, I've got a group, I kind of feed off their energy, basically, is the way that I maintain it. Otherwise, you can't get through doing this for this many hours a day without just being utterly exhausted. Because it really is a performance art. It's just like acting or modeling. Actors and models have like industry-required breaks every so often. Teachers don't, and they should. Wow, it takes a lot. But it's worth it, you know? Like you get back what you put into it, and I think that's kind of what I'm trying to, the tangent that this is kind of connected to. So you're commanding attention and respect from your learners. This is also going to get you more engagement. When people find you more interesting, they're more likely to talk to you. If they think you're really boring, and if you just kind of stand there and they're like, what's this rock? Is this or this? And you're like, yes. That doesn't help anybody learn. But if you get really excited about it, even if it's something that isn't that exciting, it's gonna be like, no, it's gonna give encouragement and it's gonna show that passion. And hopefully that'll be reciprocated. So somebody comes up to you with a rock and they're like, is this an igneous rock? And you're like, yeah. I really like the weird gray spot on this side. Do you think you could find more of them that look more like this? See, now you've taken what they've brought you, you've acknowledged it, you've given interest, you've given respect, you've given attention. Now that learner is more invested in the task of finding more things that are closer to your original goal. So not only are you affirming that person, but you're also making them more interested, more likely to remember, and giving them better chances of successfully completing the task. So that way of talking to a person, no matter what age they are, is really going to be the most useful thing that you can do, I think, when you're giving any kind of class at all. That kind of just give respect, get respect, give respect, get respect, give attention, get attention. It's a two-way street. It's just the way that it works. Teaching is it's a relationship. It's a relationship with your learners. Not like a relationship with a capital R, but you are having a human relationship with another person or with a group of people. And you gotta, as we all know, with what we've traditionally thought of as relationships, those do take energy and they take work, and so does this. But it's doable and it's enjoyable, and I hope that you're getting a little taste for some of the things that kind of make it so that you can create a world of learning for your students. All right, I think the next thing that we're going to get into is talking about how to field questions and how to field difficult students. So let's try that. All right, so I'm going to make a chart thing. I'm sorry if it takes a moment in advance. Oh, I'm not supposed to be apologizing. Thank you in advance for your attention and patience while I finish this chart. That's a better way to do things than to apologize to a group of learners. You're not sorry you're teaching them, you're glad that they're there listening to you. Alright, so we have two kinds of questions. So we are answering these questions. I'm sure you guys know what a yes or no question is, okay? All right. So the first kind of question we're going to talk about is closed-ended questions. So these are questions where the answer is either yes, no, I don't know, sure, whatever. One word, closed responses that don't give you any more information from your learner than just a binary response. That's it. So sometimes these are really, 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 really useful when you are trying to make sure that there is established clarity about a rule. We do not run near water. Does everyone understand that? When you hear a loud yes, that's probably a good sign. In that situation, you don't want to ask an open-ended question about, now, what do we know about running near water? Not a good time for that. There's other places where those are more appropriate. So those are called open-ended questions. Okay, so open-ended questions are where the learner has to provide the response. So the person that is being asked the question has to actually generate and say something. Instead of saying, is your name Roger?
Yes.
What is your full name? See, it's a different way of getting the same information, but now your learner has generated it. They feel more included, and it's giving you a much bigger amount of information than you originally started with. So, open-ended questions. Learner provides answer info. Alright. So there are situations where open-ended questions work really, really well, especially when we're doing more like artistic kind of stuff. You want people to be expressive, you want people to really tell you what they think about something, and that's how you want to say it. You want to talk about things that start with like how, why, where, all the W questions that we all learned about in Schoolhouse Rock, those of you that have seen Schoolhouse Rock. Those are really good places to start when you're trying to think of some open-ended questions. I like to think of questions in advance when I teach a class, which is another reason, I think I said this before, that this is really hard for me, is that I don't have a way to ask questions, because that is one of the big things that my teaching does, is I want my learners to kind of generate the information for themselves based on their own conclusions and their own perception of what's going on, or research. You know, as in whatever context you want that term to be used, that's where I want my information to be coming from. So not being able to ask my pre-planned questions is hard. So in lieu of that, that's why I've scheduled in like little things where I try and talk to Roger, I try and write on the board, and try and do like different things to make it more dynamic. You don't want to just have talking the whole time. You want to like punctuate it, make it more irregular. It keeps people's interest. Again, going back to those bad professors or the bad teachers that we always had, how many of you have fallen asleep in class? Hardcore, multiple times I've done it. I'm totally going to admit that I have very much fallen asleep in class. I fell asleep in class so hard once that the professor let me sleep until the next class came in. Yeah, I was that tired, but also that class was that boring, okay? It was art history. We went into this room, and the professor had us all sit down, and she was so nice, and her voice was just so soothing and talked in this rhythmic pattern with the exact same ups and downs for 2.5 hours in the dark while we all looked at slides of classical art. Click. In this piece, we see the Baroque representation. Shoot me, just terrible, terrible, terrible. You gotta have something to come in and like actually like, you gotta do something. Your entire class is gonna go to sleep, especially if it's in the dark and it's on classical art and you're talking with that voice. I mean, seriously. But you don't want that kind of monotony. You don't want to have just you talking the entire time. You have to like move around, even if it is as much as going like this. Sometimes stuff like this is a really refreshing change of pace. Just talking to a different area of the room, facing a different area of people, moving your body into different positions that look kind of cool. And don't actually do that unless you're like showing people how to stretch. But you know, you don't want it to be visually boring. You don't want it to be auditorily boring, and you don't want it to be mentally boring. It's kind of your responsibility to make sure it's not mentally boring. But I know you guys are all going to teach really cool stuff, so I'm not very worried about that. If you have good content, you have a passion for what you want to talk about, you can figure the rest out. So, going back over here, because it's just easier for me to see on the thing. That's the only reason I'm here. So we've got these, now we're going to talk about answering questions. Okay. I know there are a lot of times when you get a question, especially when you're teaching a class on something you haven't taught before, and you're just like, ask me a question about something I couldn't possibly know. Just anything, something I couldn't possibly know. Computer science related, what is a what? Okay, Roger just asked me what a proton is. I have no idea what a proton is. Crap. What do I do? Okay, what do you do as a teacher? So a little kid who is depending on you, okay, and thinks that you are the answer to all things bushcraft, or foraging, or tree planting, or bird watching, or swimming, or whatever, it doesn't really matter. What is the answer to this question? And you just sit there and you're like, just tell them, I don't know, but I would be really excited to help you find out. That way, it doesn't just say, like, I have absolutely no idea how to answer your question. It's also saying, I want to empower you to be able to find this information out for yourself in the future, so that you can use this going forwards, and you can use, like, this method of how to find information again. But it also teaches you. So, you look good. You didn't admit that you didn't know. I mean, you did, but like you did it gracefully, did it in a way that didn't make you sound or look dumb. You enabled somebody and, you know, and gave power to their statement and affirmed that it was an important question to be asked. And then you helped them find an answer, which taught you and taught the learner. So, you know, it's a really good system to use. There's also the problem of when you get really dumb questions. And I know everybody says, no, there are dumb questions. I have taught in high school, there are dumb questions, okay? When you get one of those, how you handle it is going to be the way that kind of defines how those learners, especially when you're dealing with kids, how they think of you. Because if you handle it like a pro and just let it roll off, you're going to be fine. If you get all like, meh about it, they're going to walk all over you for the rest of the thing. So this is a way that preemptively deals with discipline issues too, especially if you know that you've got kids that are going to kind of throw you a couple of curveballs while you're teaching. So let's say that, like, I don't know, we're talking about something that's going to have some kind of a silly word. Stamen. I've had laughter at stamen before when I've been teaching kids with flower stuff, okay? So, stamen, okay. Then, what do you do as a teacher? Do you just kind of ignore it? Because if you ignore it, you're letting them do it. I mean, I know that you're not like giving them power, but you're still letting it happen, and you don't want that to happen because you want those learners to be engaged and paying attention to you. You also don't want to go, stop that right now, or I'll send you to the principal's office. Because that's what you look like to those kids, is a caricature. Being, you know, just blowing steam like every other teacher they've ever had. You gotta be different than that. Somebody makes a fart noise and be like, it's awesome. I mean, like 7 out of 10. Could have been louder, but, you know, let's focus here for next time. We can compete about it later. Redirect, bring it back in, while also acknowledging and respecting. Even though it's a dumb fart noise, if you acknowledge it and respect it, they won't do it again. Because basically you took the power of it being, like, distracting away. You didn't make it distracting. You just worked it into the lesson as if nothing was even happening. And it's an art. It's kind of like being able to take something that's really distracting. Like, there's a leaf out here that's been bothering me for like 10 minutes. I've been trying to like figure out exactly why it's moving this way. I can't talk to it as a learner, but I'm trying to figure out ways to work it into my teaching. So I'm standing in a way that I can see it, and I'm also pretending there's other people that way. So when you guys see me look over here, I'm definitely looking at a leaf, okay? Because I'm distracted. So there's a distraction that doesn't even come from a student, and those happen too. Maybe you've been standing for 5 hours. You really have to go to the bathroom, and you can't because you're like on belay, or you're with a group of people that absolutely need your supervision at all time, like little kids, and there's no way that you could excuse yourself for that long in the area you're in. Those are issues. They're really distracting, and they do pull away from like our ability to teach and our ability to focus. My best suggestion for when you're dealing with stuff like that, acknowledge it and work it in. Those are like the 2 best things. Even if it really is like, guys, I have to go potty so bad right now. Can we please walk a little bit faster to the parking lot because Miss Kreitz has gotta go. They think it's funny. They hurry up. You achieve your goal. It works. But if you ignore it, then it just becomes like this stressful, awkward thing where you feel like you're gonna have a meltdown and like everyone's uncomfortable, you know? So working with distractions, even if they aren't coming directly from students, is huge. So I think the other thing that I want to say that kind of branches off of this is make sure that you're equipped for whatever you're going to do. I know a lot of the people that signed up for this class teach things that, you know, it's a nature-based class, you're going to be outside. There's obviously risks involved in being outside, especially if you're talking about it from like a lawyer standpoint. We already talked about having a waiver or insurance. I'm gonna like really emphasize the waiver. Do not take people someplace unless you have a waiver signed. Don't do it. And, the next thing is you don't want to tell people information that you're not qualified to tell people. So I am not qualified to teach calculus. I'm not technically unlicensed to. That does not mean that I should be teaching anyone calculus at all, ever,
ever, don't ever make me do that. I know my limitations, I know what I can do, and I know what I can teach you, and I am not going to try to teach you something that I'm not comfortable with, because that means that I am putting you in danger, especially if we're in an outdoor setting. If I don't know how to do underwater rescue in a scuba suit, I am not going to try to teach you to do underwater rescue in a scuba suit. If I don't know how to tie that kind of knot, I'm not going to try to teach you how to do it just based out of what's in my book that's in front of me. Don't do that kind of stuff. Make sure you only teach what you can teach. Admit it when you don't know how to answer a question. Admit it when you don't have it, when a task doesn't work for you. It can be challenging, but it's really, really important, not only for your safety, but also for it's best practices. Goes back to that thing we talked about at the beginning, you just want to maintain the integrity of your class and maintain your integrity as an instructor. So, yeah, don't teach what you don't know how to teach. For preparedness, first aid kits are always super important. If you're going to teach a class anywhere that involves children, I don't care if it's the library, bring a first aid kit. Somebody will get an owie or a booger or something. If you're doing it with adults, I would make sure that in that first aid kit also include things like Midol, feminine hygiene products, Tylenol, ibuprofen, etc., Imodium. That happens a lot. Iodine tablets for water, just in case a filtration system goes down or if there's an emergency situation. You want to make sure that you've got stuff to deal with. I mean, all the normal things for bandages, Band-Aids, antiseptic. A good basic kit is just always a good idea. I don't really see how that could possibly not benefit somebody. If you're doing something more specific, climbing or any kind of super high-risk activity, you probably want to have each individual learner carry their own safety equipment. When you're with kids, that's not as good of an idea, but when you're working with adults, as much safety stuff as possible that weight will allow. And, don't go insane, but really over-prepare. It's never a bad idea. You will end up using it, and you're going to be like, wow, I am really glad I brought this. Every time, even when it's something that you think is going to be dumb, just bring it with. Ooh, moleskin. Moleskin and second skin for blisters. That's good for anywhere you're going to walk, especially even with kids. That stuff is awesome. I wouldn't have made it through a lot of backpacking trips without that. So, you want to have... So, first aid supplies. The other thing that you want to do when you have a group of learners together, and it doesn't matter who they are, and this can be part of your waiver, you need to have a list of the names and pertinent medical information, like if they're allergic to bee stings, or if they are asthmatic or diabetic. You need a list, a comprehensive list of all of those people's information, as well as emergency contact information. I don't care where you're going or what kind of class you're teaching. If you do not have that, then you are endangering the lives of your students and yourself. So I'll put that up here too, and I'm going to put it in purple or something so you know how important it is. Alright. So, full names, contact info. Is it pertinent or pertinent?
Pertinent.
Okay. I'm going to add meds to supplies too, because if you've got somebody that needs medication, you need to make sure that that's with you. Alright. So I know that might have been kind of a duh for other people, but I feel like I really need to say it. It's one of those things that's really important. Also, make sure that your CPR certification, your first responder certification, lifeguard certification, belay certification, all of that stuff, please make sure that it's updated and on file before you decide to take a class out. The worst thing ever is when somebody decides that they're going to teach, this amazing backcountry class, and then it finds out that they not only don't have a permit to teach, but that they don't have a permit to be there. That gets really messy.
or if you find out that like the person taking care of your kid didn't have like basic certification in first aid, that would be pretty upsetting to a lot of parents. So, you know, just make sure that like you're up on that. I know that it costs money, but you know what, it's like $10, go and do it. It's really worth it. And even if you've had the certification for 20 years, go update it. Like, there's absolutely no reason that you couldn't use some practice on that. I mean, hopefully we never ever have to use those skills, but if we're gonna be licensed to use them, we might as well be good at it, right? So, go to the library, retake the class. It's in your benefit. So, we also want to make sure that everybody is dressed appropriately and that you communicate in advance if people are going to need to dress in a way that's different than what they would normally wear to like work or school. If you told me that we were going to go hike Mount Hood today, I'd be pretty upset based on what I'm wearing. If I showed up and you didn't tell me in advance that I needed to wear different clothes, somebody could be upset and it wouldn't be appropriate. I mean, look, you got all of this area, that's sun exposure. I mean, I don't even have good shoes on. Like, they're Merrells, but I don't have the backs on them. Make sure you tell people in advance you need to wear whatever kind of shoes. If you've got a specific thing in mind where you're going to need people to wear steel toes or any kind of safety equipment, make sure you tell them that in advance too. I know shoe sizes are kind of hard to fit for certain people, so they might want to bring stuff from home if you're providing it. Make sure that people realize what kind of risks are involved. So if you're going to be hiking Mount Hood, like, people need to know that it could get hot, it could get cold, it could get humid, there could be lightning, there's bugs and bears and bees and all those different things. Make sure that that's clearly communicated to people. I know a lot of advanced classes, this isn't going to be as important of information, but if you're planning on taking a bunch of kids hiking for a mile, they need to know that like all of these things are possible. A lot of parents, not existing parents, a lot of parents aren't really aware of how the world works, and therefore some of the kids don't get the kind of information and basic learning about how the world works at home that some of us would like them to. So if you're doing anything with minors, if you're doing anything with kids, send home like a printed out flyer with all this written down, because the things that you think are going to be a no-duh, you're going to get some mom that's going to send her kid in like overalls without a shirt and flip-flops. That's what's going to happen. Like, it happens every time, so just make sure that everybody is like really, really good there. The other thing I wanted to talk about, making sure that you have proficiencies for your students. So if you guys are going to do anything with swimming, boating, climbing, basically anything where there's like a specific skill, if you're not doing a basic, like, here is how to move through the water level swimming class, you need to already know the skill levels of your learners. I'm going to put that up here too. What color should we use? Here we go. So, now, this is part of that knowing your audience thing that we talked about at the beginning. Just making sure that you know like the background of the people that you're going to be working with, but also making sure you know and you're comfortable with like their skills and doing different things. If somebody is going to need extra floaties, you need to know that in advance, and that's a good thing to be able to bring with you. Alright, so we've gone through kind of a lot of like the risk and liability stuff and a lot of preparedness. We've talked about questioning and how to really like engage with learners and like get some of that respect coming to and from both you and the learner. Next thing I want to talk about is how to get learners to work with each other. But I'm going to give you guys another break for a couple of minutes first. It's right a little after 11, so we'll do that, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about how groups work together.
everybody. Okay. Alright, so I hope you've enjoyed the class so far. We are going to be moving on to talking about how groups work within themselves, and what you can do as like a facilitator of that group rather than just a direct instructor. A lot of the things when we work outside, we don't want to work in like there's one person who is giving a lecture and everyone else is listening. It usually needs to be more interactive than that. A lot of people talking to each other, you can do partner work, you can do like groups of 3, groups of 4, or whatever, teams, it's however you want to do it. Doing stuff like that, especially when you're like trying to build community in a group, it can be really, really helpful. We'll put that up here. So, alright. So group interaction. When we're working with groups of people, we have already gone through the process of kind of gauging who our learners are and how they're learning. Now we need to see how they're going to interact together, which is a totally different ballgame. And I know that this is just a lot of like how to social all at one time, but it's really important, and like all the pieces kind of work together in order to get you to have like a really smooth running, like well organized class. So, basically when you have a group of people together, my classes usually, I would say like, a small class would be 4 or 5 people for me. I often work with students one-on-one, and then I work with classes that are way bigger than that. I've done classes of 28, I've done classes of 128, so it kind of just depends on what your situation is and who you're working with. I highly recommend getting your learners to bounce stuff off each other. You guys have been sitting here for an hour listening to me talk already. It's probably getting a little monotonous. I'm sorry, I don't have a better way of doing it this time. Again, this was kind of a dry run for me to get through and figure out exactly how to do this in the future. But having people work off of each other gives you a little bit of a break. And that's important. I've been taking really scheduled breaks because it's important to like stop and breathe for a minute and like collect your thoughts and kind of like figure out what you're going to do next. And with a live stream, it's difficult to do that without just taking a formal break. When you're doing it in the field, you're going to have people that want to have a conversation, or you're going to want to have 2 people discuss an idea before we bring it up as a group. Some of the reason that we do that is to interrupt monotony, and another reason that we do that is it actually increases, it's that generation, the individual generated learning again. It gets people to kind of think through it on their own, using another person as a sounding board before they verbalize their answer out loud. So for example, if I had a group of 10 or something and I asked them all to go into partners, ask them, what do you think would be the reason that there's this this geological feature in this area? Why is there a mountain here? Why does it exist? What do you think? Talk with your partner about it for a couple minutes, and then we're going to come together as a group and discuss our answers. So what that does is it gives the kids a chance, or the learners, even if you're doing it with adults, because this works really well for adults too, sometimes even better. It gives them a chance to work out what they want to say before they have to say it, and then there's more confidence when they're bringing that up in a group. They also have a more developed and thought through answer. So instead of just like, the first thing pops into your head, you just blurt it out, now you've actually thought through the pros and cons of your thought process, run it by another person, and so you have more of a refined product to be able to answer the question. So that can work really well. When you're doing it with a larger group, I would recommend doing it in like groups of 3 or 4 rather than groups of 2, just because it's more efficient with that many people. The other thing that you can do if you're not a fan of group work at all, which I completely understand, many people are like, I would rather die than be put in a group or a partnership. That's fine. Just have that person write it down on a piece of paper. The paper can be their sounding board instead of another person. That's fine. Some learners really do have a better time and learn better when they are not forced to work with somebody else.
and you want to be accommodating of those learners. I can't stress that enough. The biggest turnoff to a teacher ever, or to a class, or anything like that, especially for people that don't necessarily love social interaction, is forcing them into groups. If there's any way that you can avoid doing that, or that you can just like provide an alternative, like you can go into groups of 2, or independently you can write this in your book, you know, that's going to give somebody an option, and it gives the learner more control over what's happening to them, and it inspires more confidence. It also gives you, you know, people will think of you really well for being respectful of your students, and we keep coming back to that word, and I think that's like the main theme for today. So, all right. We also, when we're doing with groups, you know, if you have a bunch of people that don't want to talk to each other, let's say everyone goes for the notebook option, what do you do then? Well, then you have to do a little bit more work, but that's okay. What we'll do is everybody, you know, wrote their thing down in their notebook. Now we're going to take the time and individually go through and have those people share. Even if it takes a little bit more time from your lesson, you can't invalidate the work, the cognitive effort that students have put into learning your material just because you don't have time for it. Maybe you have to slow down your lesson. Maybe you have to make some adjustments for timing later. Maybe you take something in or take something out, put something back in, whatever. But make sure while you're doing this that you just remember to accommodate your learners. You're there for them. You're not there for you. I mean, you can just sit in a room and talk to yourself if you want to be there for you, but it's really important to have that interaction and have that respect. If you want people that aren't interacting to interact, that's hard. I have a few tips for that one, but I have a really difficult time working with people that don't want to work, or that don't want to be there. That's a challenge. The thing I can suggest there is really to just use humor as much as possible. Like, if you don't have, if you've got a bunch of people that don't want to be there, don't want to talk to each other, refuse to engage, don't want to participate, just go all out crazy silly. Just be a dork. It makes people smile even if they don't want to, especially if you get sillier and sillier. And once you've got everybody laughing, usually that tends to kind of change the mood enough that you can start being able to edge in those questions and start being able to like figure out how to get, you know, well, this person and this person don't seem to hate each other, so they could talk, right? And kind of try that and propose that to both of them, and however you want to do that, and then eventually, okay, you got 2 people talking, cool. Now you have an example of 2 people talking that you can demonstrate to other folks. Be like, hey, see person A and person B, they're talking really nicely. Why don't you and person D talk really nicely too? Okay, so once there is like an example, a peer example that can be followed, people are much more likely to tag onto the idea. It's the whole thing with like why fads happen and why social media is a thing. One person likes it, and I'm like, oh cool, that person likes it, I better like it too. Same thing happens in real life. Be like, oh, that person likes math, I better like math too. Ooh, that person likes rocks, I like rocks too. It works really well, and especially with younger and more impressionable people, it tends to kind of, it all falls into place. It all works out. So that I guess is my discussion on how to get groups to interact. I really wish that I could ask for questions from you guys. I think that's one thing that's going to be my biggest critique of this class experiment, is that I really need to find a way for you to be able to ask questions while I'm teaching. Because it's difficult for me to do this without that. So, all right. Well, I mean, I guess that's kind of it. I mean, not in like a shortened version, but like without being able to do a lot of the interactive stuff. I mean, this is about the amount of time that a regular class would run for me. This is a lot more talking than I would normally do. But I also don't want to make you sit here and waste tons of time listening to me babble on when I've given you pretty much the crux of what this class is going to be about. So I hope you enjoyed it. I did. I thought it went really well. I'm excited to see how this could turn out if I did more with it in the future. I'm also excited to see some feedback from those of you that have taken the time out of your day to watch it. I really appreciate it. And I hope that you have a wonderful, what is it, Saturday? Yeah, it's Saturday. All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.